We all want to understand complex stuff. But who has time to wade through mountains of research? That's why you're here on the deep dive. We take the plunge so you don't have to. You sent over some really interesting research, and today we're going deep on something we all do, well, most of us anyway, writing.
Yeah, how do we learn to write? How does that change as we get older? These are big questions.
And we're tackling them head on with the help of some experts in the field. We've got Berninger, Fuller, and Whitaker. They've done a ton of work on writing development, and they look at it from two really cool angles. The product, meaning what actually ends up on the page, and the process, meaning what's happening in our heads when we write.
Right, so we'll be exploring those two sides of writing, the product and the process.
Exactly, and we'll be tracing how they evolved from the very first scribbles to, well, to podcasts like this one.
And trust me, there's some really surprising things we discovered along the way.
Oh, I bet. Okay, so let's start with the basics. When we look at the product side of writing, how does what we actually produce change as we develop?
Well, there's a pretty clear pattern that emerges. It starts with scribbling, those first joyful marks on a page, usually around 18 months old.
Makes sense. Got to start somewhere, right?
Exactly. Then those scribbles get a little more organized, you start seeing more controlled zigzag lines, and then kids start trying to draw pictures.
Ah, so the visual representation comes in.
Right, and then you start noticing shapes that kind of look like letters. Then they string those shapes together, but they're not quite distinct letters yet.
Like a sort of pre-writing stage.
Exactly, variations without segmentation, that's what researchers call it. Then those pre-letters start lining up like they're trying to be words. Then, boom, real letters.
Right.
Then actual words appear, followed by groups of words that are somehow related. And finally, sentences.
It's like watching a child learn to walk, each step building on the one before.
Yeah, it really is. And it's so similar to how we learn to speak, starting with single words and then combining them, eventually forming sentences. Both written and spoken language follow this path of increasing complexity.
It's fascinating how these parallel developments happen.
Oh, absolutely. And you know what else is interesting? Around age 3, kids start understanding that drawing and writing are two different things, that they have different purposes.
That's a pretty big cognitive leap, isn't it?
It really is.
Okay, so we've got a roadmap of the product side, those external, visible changes in writing. But what about the internal stuff, the mental processes behind the pen?
Yeah, that's where things get really fascinating. Researchers have identified 3 core processes involved in writing: planning, translating, and revising.
Okay, those sound familiar, but let's break them down. What does planning look like in, say, a beginning writer versus a more experienced writer?
Well, younger writers tend to plan as they go. They have an idea and just start writing, figuring it out along the way. Older writers, on the other hand, they're more likely to strategize beforehand. They think about their goals, who they're writing for, how they want to structure their ideas.
So it's the difference between diving straight into the pool and carefully planning your route on a map before you set off on a journey.
Exactly. Researchers use the terms knowledge telling for that spontaneous, just get it down approach that's common in younger writers.
Makes sense.
And knowledge transforming for the more deliberate, goal-oriented planning you see in more experienced writers. But here's the thing, even young kids, like in first or second grade, they have a basic understanding of different text structures, like how to tell a story, beginning, middle, and end, or how to explain something clearly.
You wouldn't necessarily think they'd have that awareness so early on.
Right, but it's there, they're applying it in their own way, even if it's not as sophisticated as what you'd see in a high school essay.
Interesting. Okay, let's move on to translating.
Yeah.
What exactly does that involve when we talk about writing?
So translating is basically taking your thoughts and turning them into language, which is text generation, and then turning that language into written form, the actual letters and words on the page. That's transcription.
So 2 steps within translating.
Right. Now, here's something we found. Younger writers often rely on what are called remote connections between ideas in their writing, meaning the connections aren't super clear. Older writers, they work on making those connections tighter, more logical, what we call local connections.
So their writing flows better, ideas link together more smoothly.
Exactly. And there's been a ton of research on grammar instruction, and guess what? Just teaching grammar rules in isolation doesn't actually make people better writers overall.
Really? So you could have perfect grammar, but still write a confusing or poorly structured piece.
Exactly. It's not just about knowing the rules, it's about how you apply them, how you organize your thoughts, how you craft a coherent narrative.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like having all the ingredients for a cake but not knowing how to bake it. What about the physical act of writing, like handwriting or typing? How do those mechanics play into this whole process?
Well, those mechanical demands can be a real roadblock, especially for younger writers. They're still struggling to form letters, spell correctly, and all that. It takes up a lot of mental energy.
So it's like their brains are working overtime just to get the words down.
Exactly. But as those skills become more automatic, they free up mental space for the higher level thinking involved in writing. And there's actually research showing that if you reduce those mechanical demands, like having someone else write down a child's story as they tell it, it can actually lead to longer and sometimes even better writing.
That's fascinating. So sometimes taking away that physical burden can unlock more creativity and better organization.
Right. Especially for kids who struggle with those mechanics, it can be a real game changer.
Okay, let's tackle the last piece of the puzzle. Revising. What does that look like for developing writers?
So, revising is all about going back and improving what you've written. But pre-adolescent writers, they rarely revise spontaneously. They're like, done. First draft is the final draft. But if teachers encourage them to write multiple drafts, give them specific feedback, and create a supportive environment, then they start to get it.
So revision is something you have to learn, not something that comes naturally.
It seems that way. And revising has two main parts. First, you got to spot the problems, and then you got to fix them. And for developing writers, that first part, finding the problems, that's often the harder part.
So it's not that they don't know how to fix a sentence, it's that they don't see the problem in the first place.
Exactly. Now, here's another interesting thing. Both developing and skilled writers tend to focus more on surface errors at first. Things like spelling and grammar.
Rather than bigger picture stuff like organization or clarity.
Right. They might miss a weak argument or a confusing transition because they're so focused on making sure every comma is in the right place.
It's like they're polishing the silverware before they've even set the table.
I like that analogy.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about how kids learn to write. But what about experienced adult writers? Is there a model that describes their process?
Yeah, the most well-known model is the Hayes and Flower model. It says that skilled writers don't just plan, then translate, then revise in a neat little line. They jump back and forth between those processes. It's recursive, and their long-term memory, all their knowledge and experience, that plays a huge role too.
Makes sense. The more you know, the better you can plan and write.
Exactly. And the task itself also shapes the process. Things like the purpose of the writing, the audience, the tools you have available.
So it's not just about the writer, it's about the whole context of the writing situation. Now, didn't Berninger and her colleagues add to this model based on their work with kids and teenagers?
Yeah, they argued that you can't just treat young writers as mini adults. Their processes are unique. They made some key changes to that Hayes and Flower model, like they broke down translating even further into text generation, which is coming up with the ideas, and transcription, which is getting those ideas onto the page.
And those two don't always develop at the same pace, right?
Right. They saw two main types of what they called dissociations. One is where kids can talk up a storm, their vocabulary is great, they have tons of ideas, but their writing is a mess. Their text generation is ahead of their transcription skills.
Ah, so their minds are racing, but their hands can't keep up.
Exactly. And then you have the opposite. Kids with beautiful handwriting and perfect spelling, but their writing is short and simple. Their transcription is strong, but their text generation is lagging behind.
So it's like having a fancy sports car, but not knowing how to drive it.
I like that. Another key point Berninger made is that each person has a unique profile of oral and written language skills. Being good at one level doesn't necessarily mean you'll be good at another.
So a kid with a huge vocabulary might struggle with sentence structure, or vice versa.
Right. And they emphasize that planning and revising are not just one-time things. They happen at different times during the writing process, and they can focus on different parts of the text.
So planning can happen before you start writing, but it can also happen while you're writing or even after you've finished a draft.
Exactly. And you can revise a whole paragraph or just a single sentence. And here's the thing, younger writers, they don't do much spontaneous revision. They need prompting and guidance.
So it's like they need someone to point out the potholes before they can start fixing the road.
Perfect analogy. They also proposed a sort of developmental timeline for how those planning, translating, and revising skills emerge. In the early grades, translating is the star of the show. Then online planning pops up, followed by online revising. As kids get older, transcription becomes more automatic, text generation expands, and they start doing more post-translation revising and more complex planning. By junior high, all those processes are humming along, but working memory and metacognition, that's thinking about your own thinking, those become really important.
So as the writing tasks get more challenging, you need more mental horsepower to handle them. And you mentioned metacognition. How does that factor into writing development?
That's huge. Berninger found that younger writers aren't thinking about their writing process in the same way that adults do. They don't really categorize their thinking as planning, translating, and revising. They just do it.
It's all intuitive for them at that stage.
Right. And even if they understand those concepts in theory, it doesn't mean they can apply them effectively. That metacognitive awareness develops gradually.
Makes sense. You can't just tell someone to be metacognitive. It's a skill that takes time and practice.
Exactly. And remember, we talked about memory. Well, Berninger highlighted the role of working memory. That's our ability to hold and manipulate information in our minds.
Like juggling mental balls while you're trying to write.
Pretty much. And the more complex the writing task, the more juggling you have to do.
So working memory gets a real workout when you're writing that big research paper or that important email.
Absolutely. Now, you also mentioned gender differences in writing. What do they find there?
Yeah, that's an interesting one.
Well, in the early grades, they saw some differences. Boys were often better at oral fluency, girls at written fluency, and integrating their motor skills with their spelling.
Interesting.
But as kids got older, those differences tended to fade. It seems that some of those early advantages might actually be related to overall compositional fluency.
So if you control for how much kids are writing, the gender differences become less pronounced.
Right. And of course, we can't forget about all those non-cognitive factors, things like motivation, emotions, the social context. Those play a huge role in how kids learn to write.
Absolutely.
Right.
Feeling confident and supported can make a world of difference. Now, shifting gears a bit, you brought two really interesting dissertations to our attention. One was by Fuller, and she looked at online planning in kids. What was she trying to figure out?
Fuller was all about those real-time decisions kids make as they write. How do they decide what to write next? She wanted to find those hidden rules or algorithms that guide their choices.
So like cracking the code of their thought process as they're writing.
Exactly. And she found some fascinating patterns. She analyzed tons of writing samples from kids in grades 1 through 9 and identified 21 categories of what she called local topic comment units. These are basically different ways of linking sentences together based on the relationship between a current sentence and what came before.
21 categories. That's a lot. Can you give us an example?
Sure, like introducing a new idea, repeating something, explaining something, giving an opinion, describing an event, making a prediction, you name it. She had categories for all these different ways of connecting thoughts.
Wow, that's pretty impressive. So even young writers have this whole toolbox of ways to link their ideas together.
They do. And she also found that the way they connect those ideas to the overall topic of their writing, that also develops in predictable stages. It starts with randomness, then free association, then commenting on a local topic with some vague connection to a global topic.
Okay, so it's getting a bit more organized.
Right, then they start creating topic sentences to guide their writing, adding more details and explanations. Eventually, they're building these multi-level hierarchies of ideas, all connected back to the main point.
So their writing becomes more focused, more purposeful.
Exactly. And it's not just about following rules, it's about developing this internal sense of how to structure your thoughts effectively.
Okay, that's Fuller's work. Now, what about Whitaker's dissertation? She looked at a different kind of writing development, right?
Right. She looked at skilled adult writers learning a new genre. Specifically, she studied graduate students in school psychology learning to write those formal psychological reports.
So instead of looking at kids developing over time, she looked at how experts adapt to a new writing challenge.
Exactly. She wanted to see how their processes changed as they gained experience. And she found some really interesting things, like the novice writers, they were very focused on the immediate needs of the child they were writing about. The experienced writers, they took a broader perspective, thinking about the long-term impact of that report.
So they were thinking about the bigger picture, the wider audience.
Right. And the experienced writers were more flexible with the report structure, while the novices were very rigid.
Like following a recipe step by step.
Exactly. And the experienced writers did more online planning, probably because they had internalized that report structure better. And both groups focused their revisions on words and phrases, but the experienced writers were better at incorporating feedback.
So they were more receptive to suggestions, more willing to make those deeper changes.
Exactly. And it's interesting the novices totally underestimated how long it would take to write those reports. Even the experienced writers found it pretty demanding.
Yeah, writing is work, even for the pros.
It is. And their understanding of the audience also evolved. Novices had a narrow view, while experienced writers considered a much wider range of potential writers.
So they were thinking about how that report might be used in different contexts by different people.
Right. And their emotional experiences were interesting too. Novices felt more overwhelmed, while experienced writers felt more anxious.
The pressure of those high-stakes reports, I guess.
Yeah. And interestingly, the novices sometimes enjoyed the novelty of learning something new, while the experienced writers got more satisfaction from feeling competent. And feedback, that was a big source of negative emotions for both groups.
It can be tough to hear that your writing needs major revisions.
It can. And it seemed like motivation shifted too. Novices were more intrinsically motivated, while experienced writers were more driven by deadlines and external expectations.
And even among these experienced writers, Whitaker found different approaches. Some were recursive, some linear, some holistic. So there's no one-size-fits-all approach, even for the experts. So much for write what you know. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here. What are the big takeaways, the key insights from all this research on writing development?
Well, I think it shows us that learning to write is a journey, not a destination. It's complex, it's dynamic, and it continues throughout our lives. We see predictable patterns in the product, the words on the page, but there are also these fascinating internal processes that drive that development.
And sometimes those processes don't always march in lockstep, right?
Exactly, like those dissociations we talked about. And the fact that metacognitive awareness takes time to develop, that even experts struggle when they're learning a new genre. It highlights the importance of understanding where a writer is in their development, not just labeling them as good or bad.
So for our listeners out there, think about your own writing journey. What resonates with you? What are your strengths? What are your challenges? Maybe you're a planner, maybe you're a reviser, maybe you're a bit of both.
And remember, writing is a skill. It can be learned and improved with practice. Just like Kurt Vonnegut said, we have to continually be jumping off cliffs and developing our wings on the way down.
Beautiful quote. So keep writing, keep experimenting, and keep developing those wings.
Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.